Okay, that's excellent. Here, and can we start, or should we wait a little for your colleagues?
Let's start, please. Now there's recording, so
Okay. All right. So we said in this session we want to learn how we can practically go about designing a questionnaire or a measurement instrument to measure the concepts or the constructs or the variables we are interested in studying from the real world. The data, you can validate the reliability measure anything. My screen is still shared, right?
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So it becomes important to validate or to convince whoever is your audience that the instrument you are using is precise. It is valid and it's reliable in measuring what you intended to measure. So we do the same thing in research, and we mentioned that is the advantage of quantitative research because at the end of the day, there are available statistical tools that allows you to evaluate the reliability and the validity of the instrument as compared to qualitative study where there isn't available techniques for checking or evaluating the reliability and validity of qualitative data. So here, we said the first step involves constructing definitions for your variables or the concepts you intended to study to capture their true domain. Then the next step is that you generate and judge measures, or what we call items, or what we call indicators for each of the constructs. So we will delve deeper into this as we go on. And the next step is to design the data collection instrument, which is the questionnaire, by putting the set of measures for your constructs onto that questionnaire and deploying the questionnaire in the real world or the field so that you can examine your data. Hello, Yao.
Josh, please, can you go, Henry, sorry, can you go full screen?
Oh, how is that? Okay. let me see. Okay.
It seems you are not in slide mode.
Okay. All right. Is it now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for. I think I went back to open the main document instead of the presentation I was going on with. Okay, so okay. All right. So yes, you design, you collect, and then you examine your data, and you finalize the measures. You see this finalization of measures after you have designed and collected your data because at that point, you still do some examination of the measures you collected the data, you use in collecting the data. You need to do some initial pruning and cleaning of the data first. Then the next step is to establish validity and reliability of the measures. These are important at this stage of scholarly studies and research, because data can just say anything. Numbers can say just about anything. You can manipulate figures to just tell any story at all you want. Because of that, it can create some kind of skepticism about the results you produce. So in research, because we have said that we really want to provide relevant, accurate, and timely information for managers to take informed decisions about critical issues about the business, we want to convince our readers that the processes in obtaining the quantitative data we are going to analyze is valid and reliable, so that the analysis we will perform on them, we can rely on those findings. So these are the steps you will go through systematically to capture quantitative data and prepare them for analysis. So construct definition and content domain specification. So if you remember what we discussed during the approach to the problem, which is the literature section, we tried to look at various sections of the literature chapter, where we have the initial section, which is conceptual review, where you try to define clearly the constructs or the concepts in your studies model. So this is where you do most of the work, trying to understand each of your concepts, how prior researchers have defined them, in what context were they defined, what were the focus of those studies. You critically analyze and synthesize this information about the various definitions of your constructs. And then at the end of the day, you as a current researcher will settle on a definition, either by adopting from one of the existing researches or research works, or forging your own definition based on the knowledge and understanding about the concepts. To suit the context of your study, we emphasize that this was important because your study will be conducted in an environment or in an empirical setting that may deviate from what prior researchers have done. So that the essence of that exercise in the literature is to help you define each of the constructs in your study clearly, so we can know the boundaries of each of those constructs, so that when you say, for instance, when you mention, for instance, internet usage, anybody reading your work should now understand what you mean by internet usage. When you say internet usage, what are you trying to imply? Okay, we want to understand the conceptual domain of the concept internet usage. For instance, when you take a concept, an abstract notion like beauty, okay, beauty can be defined from multiple perspectives. Somebody will want to define beauty from the physical appearance. Some other persons or people will also define beauty from character, okay? The beauty in terms of character. So if you are defining beauty in your research, you must communicate clearly what your intents are in studying the concept beauty, and what are the boundaries when we are defining beauty in the context of your study. So the definition of the constructs and the content domain specification of your construct is very important. So when you state the definition, you begin to expound on the definition by indicating domain specifications of that construct. You begin to analyze the key words in the definition, what the definition hinges upon, and you begin to expand them in that light, citing examples that are observable in real life. So, by illustration, assuming in our imaginary study, we are trying to define beauty by character. So if you are trying to define beauty by character, what sort of character are we looking at to define beauty in this sense? Okay, you are looking at, say, things like respect, how one carries themselves about, addressing other people, how somebody, the person we are judging their beauty, treat other people they come into contact with, how they even open their mouth to speak, to request something of other people, or how they respond to questions posed by other people. You are trying to pick some character traits from the person, how hardworking they may be. I'm just firing ideas here. So I'm not an expert in defining beauty, so just permit me. So when you define beauty in terms of how appealing or how good one's character is, then you are looking at certain desirable characteristics, behaviors about the person you want to judge or you want to measure their beauty. Okay, so those become the domains, and if you want to judge the person's beauty in terms of character, then you say, oh, how are their manners when they are in the midst of people? How do they speak to people when they are requesting them to do something? When you ask them a question, how do they respond? When you give them a task to do, with what energy do they carry out the task? Then you can say, oh, this is a fine, beautiful man or woman. Permit me. Another person wants to define beauty in terms of appearance, physical appearance. So how round a face may be, how pointed a nose, the nostril will be. And then some people will look at the contour or the body shape. Okay. So, and then also even some things like complexion. I mean, the skin complexion, how smooth it is, regardless of whether it is a pink color, black, white, yellow, red, whatever. So, defining beauty from the physical appearance, we are looking at certain specific domains, including the skin complexion, characteristics about the skin complexion, it being spotless and smooth. 2, we are looking at the facial construction, it being a round face or something, depending on what you consider desirable. And then you having a pointed nose. Some people may even talk about the shape of the lips and all that. Then another domain about physical beauty could be the structure or the figure of a person in terms of the body shape and contours and all that. So this become the clear boundaries we have set when we are defining beauty. And in your definition, you are expected to expound on each of these domains. If it is nostril, how do you expect the nostril to be considered very beautiful? If it's about the shape, what sort of body shape would you consider to be beautiful or more beautiful or more appealing to the eye? If it's about skin complexion, what is it about the skin complexion you expect to score high on the scale of beauty and score low on the scale of beauty? Those are the things you expound when you have given a definition, you expand on these domain specifications because they help you think about how you are going to picture beauty in real life. When you pick somebody and you want to measure their beauty, what will be the key things you are going to look out for? It all comes from the definition of the construct. So it becomes very important when conducting quantitative study to clearly define every single construct or variable you have in your study so that your readers can identify with you, okay, when you said internet usage, this is what you meant. When you said attitude towards internet security, this is what you meant. We now know the boundaries when you say any of these constructs. And we know that domains or the aspects or the attributes you are concentrating on based on the context of your research. And just like we normally say about problems, if you know the problem, then it is almost half solved. If you clearly define your construct or your variables, then your empirical design is almost through. So, what is the place of theory in this? We have discussed this from our previous discussion, so I wouldn't spend much time here. Now, this is a theoretical framework. This is a theory. Why is it a theory? It's a theory because it has all the components of theory. The two components of theory are the concepts or the constructs. And these are process innovation, IT investment, and operational performance. The second aspect of or component of theory is a defining relationship among the constructs or the variables or the concepts. And here we can see some relationship. We see arrows linking them with some H1, H2A, and H2Bs there, indicating how these variables are related. Just by looking at this theoretical or analytical model, I can be able to tell the story the researcher intended to tell. The researcher seeks to evaluate the intervening role or the mediating role of IT investment in the link between process innovation and operational performance. This is theory. Right from here, I'm able to deduce what the researcher intends to do or what his thinking is about. He is thinking that process innovation may have an influence on operational performance. However, that influence could be channeled through IT investment. So just a simple theory there. It tells a lot if you know or if you understand theory construction. Okay. Now, this is a study perhaps we are considering collecting quantitative data on. What we are saying is define process innovation and tell us exactly what you mean when you say or when you mention process innovation. Tell us the domain of this construct. What are the characteristics or the key features of process innovation to look out for when we go to the organization to collect data? When it comes to IT investments, it is an abstract notion. We want to understand from you, the researcher, what do you mean by IT investment? When you say IT investment, what are you thinking about? Or what do you want us to think about? So your clear definition of IT investment will cover how we should, or what we should look out for when we are trying to picture IT investment in the organization that we are going to collect the data from. Operational performance, what do you mean when you say operational performance? You need to let your readers understand what you mean by operational performance by clearly defining it, indicating its conceptual boundaries and the domains, the key features of operational performance that you, the researcher, you are limiting your attention to. In that case, when we go to any organization to measure their operational performance in the context of this study, we will know the characteristics to look out for, okay? All right. So we need to specify the psychometric properties of each of the constructs in our theoretical framework. We need to specify the key characteristics that we should have in mind about each of the constructs so that we can begin to picture it in the organization. We can begin to form a mental picture about how we can even measure those constructs in the organization. So from a raw model like this, we transform it into a structure like this. Okay? Where when you pick process innovation, the question we ask ourselves is, having defined process innovation, what are the key features, characteristics of process innovation that are observable so that when we go to an organization and we want to have an evaluation of or a measure of their process innovation, what are we to look out for? Those become what we call indicators. The indicators. So you see for process innovation, we have 1 to 3 indicators. Remember, we are still at the conceptual level, so we haven't actually defined process innovation, but we are trying to paint that psychometric picture in there that when you have clearly defined process innovation, it will involve the key features of process innovation, which we can observe on the field. And those observable features of process innovation is what we call the indicators. So technically, your construct, which is process innovation, we normally call a latent variable. It is latent in the sense that it is not directly and holistically observable in the real world. It is a mental construction that we are giving a specific meaning to. Now, the very features of that mental construction, okay, how it manifests in real world is in several ways. And those several ways are the characteristics or the key observable features, which we are calling indicators, indicator 1, 2, 3, and more, depending on how we end up defining process innovation. The same thing will happen to IT investment. The same thing will happen to operational performance. So what it means is that in the field, what we are saying is that each of these constructs, they manifest in certain observable characteristics, certain features. A good character is manifested in behavior. So to make a judgment about the character of somebody, you observe their behavior, their manners, how they speak, how they act, how they do things. Beauty is a mental construction. If you want to observe beauty, you need to look out for the characteristics of beauty in a person. So those physical characteristics you'll be looking at, or the observable features you'll be looking out for to gauge your construct are what we call indicators. They are also called observable indicators. And a set of them are called measures or measurement items. So when you hear indicators, measurement items, or measures in the context or in the dialogue of research, we simply mean the observable characteristics or features of your latent constructs. Okay. Now, these measures or indicators, we always have this assumption that they exist in a large pool of items or indicators that you, the researcher, could tap from. We assume that there is a pool, there is a domain of those measures or observable indicators that you, the researcher, can draw from, you can sample from. Let me paint a mental picture here. The definition of beauty and the manifestation of beauty is endless. Hence, we say it lies in the eyes of the beholder. So depending on who is judging, the observable features of beauty can be endless. The whole world might not even be able to contain it. So if we want to measure beauty, we cannot measure all the possible features or observable indicators of beauty. It is the reason we first have to define beauty in the context of our research, and then indicate the key attributes or characteristics or the domain of beauty we want to focus on in our study in the definition. Having done that, we are now able to focus on just the relevant measures or indicators from the pool of indicators. So we might, for instance, say that in our case, we are defining beauty by physical appearance. So therefore, in the pool of indicators of beauty that stretches from behavior all the way to physical appearance, we are only going to concentrate on physical appearance. And even with physical appearance, we want to be specific and say that we want to focus our attention on observations bordering the body complexion, body shape, and then facial construction. That's all. So in that case, when we are sampling or we are drawing measures to capture beauty, it will have to look out for indicators that borders around these domains of physical beauty in our definition. So where exists the pool of items or measures? Of course, back to the literature. Previous researchers have defined your constructs. That is why you had to do a conceptual review. Some of them have actually measured them empirically with questionnaires. So you have information about how they measured the constructs in their study. So that becomes the pool. Also, measures can be sourced from experts' judgments from the relevant population. The phenomenon you are studying, there are people who practice them, who live with those phenomena daily, who take decisions about those phenomena daily. Managers, academicians, or researchers, students, or people in the society, in a particular culture, in a particular organization, in a particular line of business, profession, they are familiar with the phenomenon you are trying to go and capture empirically. They know what it means when you say internet security. They know what it means, or they live practically with each of those concepts you are trying to study. So they also become a source for those indicators. So in cases where the measures may not exist in the empirical, the existing literature, you may need to consult experts who have in-depth knowledge and working knowledge around those phenomena you are trying to study, the concepts you are trying to study. You will learn from them observable attributes of those constructs, abstract notions, so that you can develop measures for them. Sometimes you, the researcher, you can become the source because it might be a new notion you are introducing. You must go through the toil of defining it clearly and defining its features, its domain, and then coming out with tentative measures for that concept. Concepts. They come out with new concepts notions. They observe real life and come and go through those new notions, and they go to the empirical world, try to capture that notion and so there are times you as a researcher, or that is at least not well understood. So at the end of the day, sometimes the construct has been defined and used in previous research, but in a different you want to apply that concept. Then what it means is that you may not have adequate pool of items or measures to draw from, but you, the researcher, will have to think critically based on how you have defined the concept to come out with that can be observed from the real world on that construct. Again, I want to remind you, if you want to ask a question or you want to draw attention to anything, be sure to raise your hand. I will pause and let you speak to us. Okay. So our aim in this exercise is to systematically sample all content areas of the construct. Remember, we are trying to be very systematic and at the end of the day, propose or publish outcomes that managers are going to use in making decisions in real world. So we want to remove every shred of doubt about the authenticity of anything we are doing. If you are following me, you will understand that research is a serious business in academia. So it has to be done with such seriousness. In defining anything you claim you are going to study, you must do that very systematically, taking into consideration every possible definition of that construct and carefully and critically analyze and evaluate each definition and synthesize the various perspectives of the definitions to arrive at a more fitting definition in your study. And in coming out with the measures or the items, you must convince the reader that you have considered almost an exhaustive pool of items to measure that construct. If you demonstrate that you have considered the various measures or a diverse pool of measures for the construct, but have eventually settled on a sizable number of those measures for the variable or the construct you are studying, then you convince the reader that you have done a diligent work. So in that case, you need to be very mindful of the source of those items. If you go to the wrong market to look for the right items, you will surely get the wrong items. So what are the sources of items? We have indicated from literature, from experts' judgment, and sometimes from you, the researcher. But what is a good source? If you pick literature, you are talking about published articles. From which journals were they published? We have predatory journals that will just publish anything that any researcher sent them without taking the articles through blind peer review. That is a rigor review of the articles by other academicians. When you take measures from sources that are considered predatory sources, then we cannot rely on your measures. So in constructing item pools for your construct, you need to make sure that you are only looking at articles that were published in reputable journals that suggest those articles under peer review, so that there is confidence in the academic environment about the quality and the authenticity of those studies. So that if you mention their names, if you mention the author's name, that these measures came from, or we adopted our measures from this authority in the field, then the reader can have confidence in your work. So when you are considering literature sources to obtain items, you should be considering reputable journals, articles that have been published only in reputable journals, okay? Now, the items wording. Items are simply statements that you see in the questionnaire, the statements that you will read and then respond to. Now, the wording of those items is very important. It's another important feature you have to bear in mind. How long is the wording? How clear is the wording? Does it contain ambiguity, such that when you read the statement, you are not so sure what the researcher is requiring of you? If you are confused by reading the statement, then you'll be confused in your answers, and your answer or your response to the statement may not necessarily reflect what the researcher intended. So it becomes you and I, our responsibility to mind the wording of the items we are using to capture each construct. The wording should avoid redundancy. Useless phrases in the wording of your measures or your items will make your questionnaire unnecessarily long or lengthy. Everybody wants to read simple sentences, simple short statements that make straightforward sense so that we can act on it. When people are responding to questionnaires, already they find it a nuisance. You are taking their time, you are requiring them to do some reasoning and provide some answers to you. They wouldn't want it to take their precious time more than they are ready to commit to it. So if there are words or phrases in the item on your questionnaire, the items on your questionnaire that do not really add any value in responding to the questionnaire, you remove them. Keep the items or the measures simple, short, and straightforward. And you should be mindful of the choice of response format. Remember that for each measure, you are seeking to obtain a response from the person responding to the questionnaire. Since you are seeking a response, you must make sure that the response format you choose and the construction of the item should match. Let me use an example here. You are trying to look at the extent to which a respondent uses internet. The extent to which they use internet, extent of internet usage. And you go with an item like, or a measurement statement like, to what or how many times do you visit your Facebook account in a day? How many times do you visit your Facebook account in a day? You want to look at their frequency in using social media, which is an internet-based platform. Can somebody suggest to me what would be the appropriate response format on a questionnaire? if this question is posed to you, what are you expecting to see on the questionnaire as a response format for you to respond to? Can somebody suggest something to me? How many times do you visit your Facebook page in a day? If you hear this or if you read this kind of statements, what kind of response format are you expecting to see? Can anybody share an opinion here? Hello, Nancy. Nancy.
Yes, you see, with something like this, I would like something categorical that I can pick an option from.
You are bombarding us by categorical. You mean what? What do you want to see on the questionnaire following that statement so that you can answer?
So I would like to see the options in beans, maybe 1 to 2 times a day, 3 to 4 times a week.
Exactly.
So then brackets that I fall into and I pick that one. Yeah.
All right. Or leaving a blank and then space and then state the number of times where you can actually write the number of times. Okay. I think someone else raised their hand. Do you have a different opinion than this?
No, it's the same thing.
All right, thank you. So now imagine I asked you this question and then what you see is to a low extent, all the way to the largest extent. It doesn't make sense. The statement you read and the kind of response format that has been given, very low extent to the largest extent, it doesn't make sense. So you must know how you are trying to gauge the variable in question. And when you put the statement, make sure that what the statement connotes in terms of how it should be responded to is the exact response format you place against that statement. This is a common mistake people do. They just do strongly disagree to strongly agree, and they copy and paste that response format for every statement in their questionnaire. Meanwhile, the construction of each of the items or measures in the questionnaire vary from variable to variable, vary from construct to construct. So when you are responding, it gets to a point you get a bit confused. If you read the statement, what naturally the statement is expecting you to do, you go and look at the response format and it's something different. When that happens, it begins to take a toll on the respondent to think critically, to begin to think for you, the researcher. What were you thinking? Okay, which of these options will I take to at least get closer to how I intended to answer it? Assuming, like Nancy said, you want some response intervals like 1 to 3 times a day, 4 to 5 times a day or something, or you should just allow me to just write the number of times. Then I see low extent to highest extent. Then you get confused. In a split of second, the respondent struggles. So you know what an average respondent would do? They'll just take anything. They will just take anything. At the end of the day, that item has not measured correctly or has failed to correctly capture your intention. And if you base on that to make any analysis to inform decision, that decision might surely fail. Okay, so we will delve more deeper into some of these issues we need to pay attention to in developing the measures. Remember, you are constructing an instrument, and we in the back of our mind, we want the instrument to be precise, to capture the trait we are interested in than capturing error. We want it to be valid, we want it to be reliable, and we want the respondents to happily respond to the instrument. You cannot force people, and if you are giving questions to people, you want them to answer it more easily and not under any stress or duress or any form of torture, being it psychological or physical torture. So all these things will come to play when we are thinking about how you construct our measures. Now, a last point on the reason why we need to consider the wording, the clarity, avoiding redundancy, and the choice of response format is that the studies you may be picking these measures from may have been done in a different context where the language had to be put in a way that those who are going to respond to the questionnaire will easily identify with, will easily understand, will easily make good sense of. Now you ask yourself, yes, it is true. You are conducting studies on the same construct, the same variable. I'm even adopting the same definition as this author I'm benchmarking from. But the people in Ghana, my motherland, that I'm asking them to respond to these questions or these statements, will they understand the way the words have been constructed? Each of the items have been constructed. If your answer is, I'm not so sure, or not necessarily, then you will need to critically understand your population or your sample or your respondents, their level of knowledge, their ability to understand that kind of English, that level of English, the use of certain keywords, whether they will even understand it, will they be familiar with it? There are some terminologies in the practical world of certain industries, they are not used as we see in books. They have different names for those terminologies. So it becomes the duty of you, the researcher, since you are interested in those people in the field to respond to your questionnaire, you must pick the language they understand. Forget about your technical jargons from your study of business analytics. No, translate that jargon into a jargon that those who are going to respond to the questionnaire can easily identify with. Yes, you have studied English and we know you understand English very well. You can speak good English, big English. But because the data is not coming from you, but it's coming from somebody who may be less educated than you, you must be able to put the wording of each of the measures or items or indicators in a simple English language that they can read and understand. So sometimes we even say that when you are looking at how to word the items of a questionnaire, think about it this way. If it is in English, put it in the most basic English level of English that a JHS student can read and make sense of it. Even a JSS dropout who can read should be able to read that statement and make good sense of it. Professor Nat will always say, when he wants to be sure any idea he's conceiving makes absolute sense, he would often try to tell the idea to his little girl, who as at then was at lower primary. If that girl can make good sense of it, then he knows that he is convinced that yes, then the average person who will read this research work or who will respond to this question can also make meaning from the statement. So that is it for mining or being mindful of the wording of each statement and also the source. Right. Now, the question is, we have a large pool and to some extent an endless pool of items that we can select from to measure any construct we are studying in our research. But how many should we use? How many number of measures should we use to capture a construct? There is no simple answer to this. It shouldn't be too small. It shouldn't be too many. But it is better to include as many as is reasonable and realistic than to under-include measures. What we are saying is that a big common sense will have to come to play. We want to do our best to capture our abstract notion as accurately as possible. Sometimes, let's use the example we started with, beauty, physical beauty that we want to measure. If you want to use only one indicator to measure physical beauty, you will get it wrong. Let's try a scenario. A friend has hired you or has engaged you to look for a beautiful lady for him to spend the rest of his life with. And the definition of beauty this your friend gave you is, oh, a fair-skinned person. Now you go to the market and you find any fair-skinned lady and you fetch and you bring. Per the indicator you were given, you have fulfilled your mission. Now you present this fair-skinned lady to your friend and your friend exclaimed, "What is this?" You said, fair-skinned lady. So there is your fair-skinned lady. Have her. Chances are that when we use just a single indicator to capture an abstract notion, we will get it wrong. We may not be able to capture that notion right always, all the time. There's a probability that you might have fetched a fair-skinned lady and you present and your friend broadly as or as detailed as you define your constructs. Make sure you come out with a reasonable number of indicators that exhaustively captures You may go to a context where every lady have fair skin. So who is beautiful? It becomes a problem. So again, the number of items you will use to measure a construct is critically contingent on how you define the construct, its domain, and its characteristics. So a key note here is that all these items must come together to constitute your measurement instrument or questionnaire. So in the initial model, we're looking at, we have service innovation, IT infrastructure, and operational performance. Each of these constructs, we are going to have a number of measures that come together to capture each of these notions. And then these three sets of measures will come together to form your questionnaire. So the longer or the more items you include in measuring each construct, the longer your questionnaire will become. Now, the longer your questionnaire, the more likelihood that people will reject or will draw from participating in the study. The longer your questionnaire, the likelihood that people will answer your questionnaire haphazardly. I know many of us may have responded to questionnaires from students or researchers before. When you pick the questionnaire and it's like a book, sometimes you lose appetite to even open it. Sometimes people start responding to a questionnaire, they flip a few pages and they realize that there is still more to go and they are wondering when they are going to get to the bottom of the questionnaire. Others will be very kind with you by abandoning the questionnaire at that point. So you will have incomplete responses. Others may say, okay, if I don't complete it, they may not feel fine. And let me try to complete it. But so they just take zigzag, or 777, 11111. The implication is that when people might withdraw from participating in the study too, along the way, just take some of the answers anyhow, and that you cannot work with. It will defeat the purpose of the study. So you do not want your questionnaire to be unnecessarily long. So that means you do not want to include so many measures as they may exist in the world in your questionnaire. And at the same time, you do not want to use just a few, because using very few measures may fail. You may fail to capture the notion you are trying to measure completely. In some firms, your few indicators will suffice. In other firms, your few indicators will not suffice. If you have added that other one or two, it could be captured properly in the other settings. So in our experience and conduct of in the conduct of research, reasonably, remember, I want to show a caveat here. There is no specific rule of thumb, but for the purpose of statistical analysis, okay, that we are going to be doing to validate the questionnaires or the measures we have used in our study, for multiple indicator items, as we have started learning, you need at the end of the day, you need a minimum of 3. Sometimes 2 will be accepted, but reasonably 3 to 5 indicators. 3 to 5 indicators. And now, prior to going to the field, chances are that when you have received your questionnaires from the field and you are doing the measurement purification, chances are that you drop some of the measures. So have at the back of your mind that at the end of the day, after all purification, I want to retain between 3 to 5 indicators. If that is the case, then I can have from 5 to 6 or 7 indicators for my construct where necessary. For some constructs, you don't need up to that. But you just give yourself that flexibility, because at the end of the day, probably you might end up dropping some of the measures during your measurement evaluation or validity establishment. So if you are expecting to have, if you are planning to have retain a maximum of 4 indicators in your study, then you may want to have like between 5 to 6 indicators for each construct on your questionnaire, so that if it so happens that one of them is not a good measure of the construct you are trying to study, after you have collected the data, you can drop a few of them and still have adequate measures to go through the validation. Okay. So there must be a balance in terms of the degree of inclusiveness vis-a-vis reality. You wanting to establish your statistical goals, and 2, you being mindful of the fact that people are going to spend their time to read the questionnaire, so it shouldn't be too long to make the questionnaire wearisome for respondents. Bottom and short, a very long questionnaire will decrease your response rate. A very short questionnaire will increase response rate, but you may not obtain adequate data for your analysis. Also, a very long questionnaire may give you detailed information, but that information may not be reliable. And even if you get detailed information, it might come from just a small pool of respondents. So you should be mindful of that. Now, judging items in the questionnaire for content validity. With content validity, we are looking at how far or the degree to which experts agree about the domain of the construct and the extent to which your measurement or your questionnaire captured that domain. When we say digital procurement, what are we talking about? Among the experts who know what digital procurement is, can we see the very domains of digital procurement in your measures? You have defined your constructs. When we pick the measures from your questionnaire pertaining to a particular construct, when we look at the items you have presented, we should be able to picture the definition of the construct. That is what we call face validity. Face and content. When we look at the content of your questionnaire that you are using to capture your variables, we should be able to picture how you define the variables. So what guidelines would help us to be able to make that judgment when we are constructing our questionnaires? It says have all the items in the questionnaire or in the pool judged by experts for clarity, suitability, and specificity. You, as an independent researcher, have come out with your pool of items you want to use to measure each of your constructs. Have experts who work daily around those phenomena to look at the measures. Oh, can you take a look at these measures for digital procurement? Do you think they truly reflect what you do in practice? Do you think they truly reflect what we mean when we talk about digital procurement? Then they can give you their expert judgment. Whether the statements are clear enough to be understood by we, the practitioners. Whether they are specific enough to elicit the responses you need for your research. Whether they are suitable for the people you are going to collect the data from based on their level of knowledge and understanding of the construct you are trying to measure. Sometimes it could be academicians. Experts could mean people who are experiencing in researching on a particular topic or idea. So that is what we try to do at the university level. We try to assign you to a lecturer who has knowledge in your area of research or the topic you want to research on. Ideally, that is how it's supposed to be done, so that your supervisor is well experienced in the area you are researching, so that when you develop your instrument, you give it to him to review, to check the clarity, suitability, and specificity of the measures in your construct. The expert's opinions should be reported in your study. Remember, we are trying to construct a design so that the users of our research can be confident in how we went about arriving at our conclusions. So because of that, you should carefully document and report how you went about designing your questionnaire and ensuring that your measures satisfy content and face validity. So you have to report how you went through, how you sought third parties' opinion to ensure that the measures you are using to capture your constructs pass what we call the content and face validity. Okay. Sometimes it becomes even necessary to conduct qualitative interview with key informants, the people you are going to collect the data from. Sometimes it becomes necessary to undertake an initial interaction with them through interview to get their opinion, to get their views about this construct you are trying to study. Understanding how they understand it, knowing how they will define it, knowing how that concept manifests in their daily practice of management or operations will help you come out with measures that will clearly capture the true contents of that concept when you are going to collect the data from them. Now, having obtained the opinion of experts, okay, and have refined your measures, now you may want to go ahead and do what we call a pilot test or a pre-test. They are two different things, but they are related, okay? A pilot test means you execute your questionnaire to just a small sample of the population you wanted to study, so that they will respond to the questionnaire, and you collect the questionnaire and you examine how they responded to it, and you take feedback from them, how easy it was for them to respond and how clear the questionnaire statements were, so that you can make your final refinement of the instrument before you actually zoom into full-time data collection. With pre-tests, you could just give the questionnaire to anybody at all, not necessarily to the people you intend to go and collect the data from in practice. You may, for instance, give to your mates to try to answer the questionnaire and give you their opinion about how clear the questionnaire statements were and how easy it were to answer or not, so that you can effect their feedback into improving the questionnaire. So the third step, designing and administering data collection instrument. Assuming you are getting to the, like, you have refined your measures for each construct, approaching a final point where you are so confident in the measures you have come out with. You will need to put it together in the questionnaire instrument, bring it all together to form a document called the questionnaire that you will take it out there to administer to receive responses. It is important to define precisely as possible the purpose of your study and hence what information you require. You would have done this before even this level. So you need to make sure that that instrument is asking the right questions. It is clear and unambiguous, easy to complete, and easy to transfer to a computer, and easy to translate into numbers. Again, remember we are dealing with quantitative research. So no matter how you design the instrument to capture the responses, it should be easy to be transformed and transferred into a computer, because you are going to get a large pool of responses that you cannot analyze one after the other as you do in a qualitative study. And it should be easy to put a quantitative value on each of the responses, quantize the responses, translate the responses into numbers, because we are talking about quantitative study. So yes, you may have captured gender on your questionnaire as male and female. Tick. What is your gender? Then you put male and female, then they will tick. Of course, we can translate male and female into numbers by using binary scaling. So we can say 0 for male, 1 for female. That's why we call it dummy coding. So whatever responses you are generating from the instrument, importantly, haven't asked the right question, making sure there is no ambiguity, and making sure it is easy to complete and to be transferred to the computer. Make sure your responses can be translated into numbers so that we can analyze with quantitative instruments and techniques. So beyond the issues we have talked about, to be mindful about when constructing your questionnaire, more to consider. And like I said, they borders more on our common sense faculty. You need to talk to people who have done it before if you are new to it. You need to consult some grandfathers and some grandmothers. You need to look at good articles that have been published in good journals in the appendix to see how their questionnaires were constructed, the kind of measures they used, and how they were organized. Get the involvement of the participants. You may be studying something that is pretty new, that is so unclear, that somebody have not studied previously, or even if they have, in our context, the diversion is so much that you cannot benchmark a previous study. So you need to involve your participants so they can help you define your construct in context. They can help you come out with measures that will clearly and holistically capture those concepts in that context. The format of the questionnaire, the layout of the questionnaire document is also important. Beyond the issues we have discussed, remember how well you organize the questionnaire will tell how professional you are as a researcher and how much respect the respondent will accord to that document you have given them. If you pick a questionnaire and it is poorly organized, poor text arrangement, poor text font so that we can't even read, poor printing quality so that they are even fading. The text in the questionnaire are too together, clustered together, that it's even fatigue the eyes when we are reading. They are too tiny that I need a higher, like I need some reading glasses to be able to read, even though I don't have eye problems. Then you have failed, or you have put together a recipe for failure in that research. Your choice of font colors must be strategic to draw, or even emphasis on text in the questionnaire should be intentional to make it easier for the respondent to respond to your questionnaire. Make it easier to see things you really want to emphasize on so that you don't lose sight of it. So how you even organize and put together the questionnaire document should be professional, should be easy to read in terms of your font type, your font size, and your document spacing. In most of our practice, when it comes to using tables, putting measures in tables, how you design the table should be highly professional and appealing to the eye. The respondent picks it, they appreciate the kind of seriousness that has been committed into designing the document, and they will pay close attention to reading and responding to it. That garbage in, garbage out is a principle we are talking about here. And of course, the wording of each question, which we have talked about, and the response format, which we have talked about, and make it shorter. Keep it simple, neat, and straight to obtain higher response. You make it long to be able to include more constructs. Okay, that is fine, but be mindful that too long will cost you your entire research work. So let's see How many of us have had the opportunity to respond to students' questionnaire and tell us something you disliked about a particular questionnaire you had to answer, and something you liked very much about another questionnaire you had to answer? Can we get some experience from the class? Right now, you are a student. There was a time you were responding to a student questionnaire or a researcher's questionnaire. Can you share some ideas? Yes, Achu?
Okay, so
Yes, so after Achu, then I will come. All right.
all right, so I've responded to a couple of student questionnaires.
Okay.
Let me say, averagely, a lot of the students' questionnaires don't really answer what they say they are looking for, like the topic in there. That's one thing I noticed.
That's interesting.
The other is that most of the time they tend to ask questions and provide answers, looking at it from
leading questions.
Yes, leading looking at it from a perspective that maybe if I were to be in their shoe trying to analyze this questionnaire, it's going to be a bit difficult, because they can just ask you something that you say true or false. Then the next question, they are asking something that is giving you about 5 or 4 or 3 like a skill question, and it doesn't really follow format. So it makes
the previous question, yeah.
Thank you. It makes really reading and answering it stressful. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So you see, right from there, you begin to see that this is not a serious research. They are just doing something to represent something. So you might be compelled to just take anything just to fill the questionnaire for them. One important thing you mentioned is about the statements or the items in the questionnaire not reflecting the study they said they are conducting. So you see why we are emphasizing on theory to defining your constructs very carefully and coming out with measures that reflect the very definition of it. One thing you need to understand is that from what we are developing systematically, in the empirical world, when you design the instrument to capture your constructs from the empirical world, it doesn't capture the relationship. It only captures the variables, the constructs. So you should not give any indication in your questionnaire linking any of your variables or your constructs. Just measure each of the constructs and allow the responses through the data analysis to establish the relationships. So this is what I'm trying to say. Let me just take you back a few slides. Yes, we are trying to measure process innovation. What are the indicators of process innovation? They are the ones that should appear on your questionnaire. Also, we are trying to measure IT investment. What are the indicators or measures for IT investment? They are the ones supposed to appear on the questionnaire. Also, we need to capture operational performance. What are the indicators for operational performance? They need to appear on the questionnaire. Beyond that, how process innovation is related to operational performance should not appear in the questionnaire. How process innovation is linked with internet IT investment should not in any way, directly or indirectly, intentionally or unintentionally, be suggested in the questionnaire. That is what, if you do that, you are indicating what we have. You said it's a leading statement. You are inducing the respondent to inject the relationship. We want to measure operational performance separately, measure process innovation separately, and measure IT investment separately. And now let us use statistics to tell whether these independently measured notions are related in real life based on the responses alone. But if you go and ask a question, that suggests that does process innovation lead to operational performance in your organization? You have failed. Your instrument is injecting a relationship other than allowing the variables themselves to establish that they are related. So our brother actually mentioned that some of the questions are leading questions. They are asking the question and suggesting an answer to you. So you are asking the question and you are suggesting a relationship in the questionnaire. That is flawed. It's wrong and it's terrible when you do that in your questionnaire. So I think I saw another hand. Yeah, can you come in with your experience?
Okay, so I think yesterday I had
Yeah,
I did one
go ahead.
questionnaire. Yesterday I did one questionnaire for someone, and it was quite a good
Okay.
questionnaire in my experience. So what made it good was it was quite short. Most
Evaluation. Okay.
Most questionnaires I've come across are quite long, and as you
Okay.
get to the middle, and you start to get bored of the questionnaires, and then you throw the questionnaire away.
Exactly.
This one was quite short, about just 10 questions, and he made it a multi-choice whereby it was like
okay.
a digital, and you can just select the answer very quickly, and then you go on
wow.
to the next one. So
okay.
It was very
all
simple,
right.
very concise.
Thank you very much. So you see, from what you have said, if your questionnaire is too long, you might even throw it away. Or if you press him too much, he might just answer, take them anyhow and give to you. So these are practical terms. That is why I mentioned that sometimes, apart from following some of the systematic things we mentioned, apply some faculty of common sense to it. Put yourself in the position of the respondent. How would you feel? So just as we are mentioning, when you see a well-designed questionnaire, you know and you appreciate it. And you tell yourself, this one I can spend some few minutes to do it. Let me try and help out this researcher. Then you read and answer it perfectly, knowing that it has not taken so much of time from you, and you, the respondent, becomes happy providing the answers. When it fails to catch your attention that way, then the bad thing will happen. So let's be mindful of some of these things. Any other experience to share? If not, we'll just continue. All right. Additional issues. Okay. Okay, so some principles to have at the back of your mind. Again, we have talked about most of these. You intend to get a high response rate. So think of it. How should I design the questionnaire such that many people will answer it? Because you are dealing with a quantitative study and you need a huge sample to make your analysis. Have at the back of your mind that you want to be able to consistently get that same data if you want it. Sometimes you collect data and you go back to the field to collect again to top up because maybe initially what you collected was not adequate. Since you are using the same instrument, will you be able to get the same, like roughly the same responses? Will it be easy for you to replicate the same study? If you are taking the same questionnaire back to the same person, how likely is it that they will be able to give the same responses they gave last time? That is the beauty with quantitative studies. We don't mean the exact mark they gave on the Likert scale, but it should be closer. Unlike qualitative studies. Quantitative studies are said to be highly replicable. We can repeat it time after time. So as you are designing your questionnaire, design in such a way that it is straightforward to solicit for specific answers, such that if I take the same questionnaire back and back to the same person, their responses are not going to vary. Part of ensuring this is that your questionnaire should not be designed or should be designed not to elicit unnecessary emotions in the respondents, such that regardless of their emotion, they will be able to respond to the questionnaire very objectively. If the items on the questions are not ambiguous and are simple and straightforward, asking for specific responses, then that extent of replicability can be achieved. There are times you send a questionnaire to somebody and they send it back to you, and maybe you lose it along the way. And you want to plead with them to complete the questionnaire again. If the questionnaire is well designed, you will get the same response. I wouldn't say same as in same scientifically, but close, and the point of deviation might not be significant. That's what we are talking about. Okay. You want to be sure that your questionnaire is simple and they are short and straightforward and contain simple expressions, not double barrels, no technical jargons. If there are, they should be familiar to the people responding to it. Okay. All right. So, assuming you've done all this and your questionnaire instrument is ready, how do you get it to the field? How do you get your respondents, your target respondents, to respond to it for you? Please, what time are we going on break? For me, I'm a talker, so please, when it's time for break, you let me, okay?
In 5 minutes time.
In 5 minutes time, okay. All right. So, methods for questionnaire administration. There are so many forms. What we have here is not exhaustive, but broadly speaking, they are adequately exhaustive. Postal or mail. You can send your questionnaire by a post mail to people, your target respondents, so that they can respond to your questionnaire and return them back to you. Now, there is a lot to discuss about this. You must know your respondents, their addresses, before you can send them. So if you are connected in a city where you don't know the postal addresses of your respondents, then using a postal means becomes a problem. Postage is not free. If it is like in the advanced economies where in the community, everybody seems to have a post box by their house and you are targeting a particular community, then you can simply walk and slot in your questionnaire and then hope to come to pick it another day. But in our part of the world where you have to use the postal services, you've got to pay for the postage. And when the questionnaire has been responded to, it has to be posted back to you, and that involves payment. How do you address that? So what people do is they will pick an envelope like we used to do in WAEC some time ago. You pick an envelope, a return envelope with stamp that you have paid for it, and you put in the parcel and you send. So that when the respondent had finished completing the questionnaire at their end, they can put it in the return envelope and post it at no cost of theirs to you. So that is what I can say about mail questionnaire administration. What do you think will be the advantages and disadvantages of such a questionnaire administration method? Let's discuss. So can somebody give us one advantage and one disadvantage of using the mail approach, the postal mail approach in administering questionnaire? Or can you give a scenario of a research scenario where using a postal approach will be more appropriate or most appropriate? Any suggestion? Hello. Yeah.
I can give a disadvantage.
Okay.
The person might ignore it when he sees the questionnaire in the post. You wouldn't have anything, you can't do anything about it.
Yes, you posted, but not received.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much. But what about an advantage? Can someone try an advantage of using the postal method? Remember, I even mentioned one challenge with it because you must have the postal addresses of all your target respondents. So if your sample is said that you cannot obtain their addresses, that will make a challenge. Okay, all right. Francis.
Oh, I'm not answering. I just wanted to alert you that it's 3.
Oh, break is good. Let's take a break and come back. And what time are we returning? There's another hand. If that hand wanted to say something before we go.
3:30.
Okay,
Yes, it was about the advantage.
Okay. Quickly give us and we'll go.
Yeah. You'll be able to reach a larger number of people, like from different geographical area.
Exactly. So that is one distinguishing advantage of that, of postal approach. Okay, is that all? Okay, if that's all, then let's go and come back. So let's try to be, all of us to be on the platform by 3. We have a lot to discuss. Okay. Thank you. See you at 3:30. All right, so let's give our friends just some 3 minutes so that we can continue. Okay, so whilst we are waiting for them, if anybody has a contribution to make concerning the postal approach to administering questionnaire, you can bring it out. So in your reading and your own discussion, try and look out for more advantages and disadvantages of these things, okay? Why you should use them, or when to use them, and how can you even overcome some of the limitations. So we're on the advantage when, just when we parted, and someone was making the point that even when you have respondents who are scattered geographically, you can use the postal approach to reach them out. And we mentioned that you can make it feasible and easier if, especially, you make it easier for the respondent to be able to post back to you at no cost when they receive your questionnaire. And it also implies that you need to be making follow-ups because they may have not received the questionnaire by post. It may be lying in the post, especially in Ghana here where we have post boxes at the post office, that we only attend to it when we are expecting a mail. So you may need to be making correspondence, calling and checking up on them and reminding them to follow up to get the questionnaire. So given the challenge you may face in our environment here, it means it is a viable source or alternative in conducting your study, your survey study, but you use it when it is most appropriate. When the situation presented makes it the ideal approach, then you use it. Then you need to be aware of the shortcomings of it, so that you can try to minimize those shortcomings to make your study successful. You need to have the addresses of the your target respondents. You need to have a database of that so that you can do that. So where in a study where you don't have, or you can't possibly get the postal addresses of your respondents, it means postal approach is out. Okay. So let's continue by looking at telephone inquiry. With telephone, you can conduct your survey by calling the target respondents and reading out the questionnaire instrument to them for them to respond for you. Okay. Now, over there, you get that one-on-one real-time experience where you can be sure to read out every statement and to make sure every statement is responded to. You are there in person so that if there is any ambiguity with any of the statements or misunderstanding with any of the statements, you are there to provide clarity. Those you would consider as some of the advantages. But the disadvantage is that if it is a lengthy questionnaire, you spend more time to respond because you need to read for the hearing of the respondents and for the respondents to give you a response, which you may take from your end. Now, there's also the chance of you, the researcher, introducing some sort of bias. As you read, your tone alone might even suggest certain meaning to the statements, other than allowing the respondent to read for themselves and make the meaning for themselves. So there is that bit of disadvantage there, chances of introducing some researcher bias in there. Of course, phone calls are not for free. You pay. And depending on how long your questionnaire will be, you may pay more than it might even take to post questionnaires and receive questionnaires by post. So once again, we may want to, amongst ourselves, consider telephone inquiry as an approach to administering questionnaire and determine its advantages and its disadvantages at length or at breadth. Now, you need to look at this. You need to consider the kind of study and see whether telephone inquiry will be the most appropriate. If the questionnaire is not extensive and short enough that calling the people and asking them few direct questions will elicit the responses you need, then it becomes more ideal. If it's something lengthy, that calls for the respondent to even think more about it before they even respond, or have to even go and flip some documents, some pages in order to provide the right answers, then telephone inquiry might not be suitable for those kind of studies. So, and to conduct even that telephone interview, it means, or a telephone inquiry, it means you should have the telephone contacts of the target respondents. You must know your target respondents with certainty in terms of their contact information. Now, imagine how many people you have to call to make those inquiries to obtain your data in a quantitative study. Judgment about the cost of it, I leave it to your care. And You may be able to overcome that by looking at alternative ways of placing the call that is cheaper. Yes, there's always ways around stuff. And instead of doing the course all alone, you may have a team of researchers that field data collectors that you may have trained to help you reach out to many people in a short while. Personal visits. I think that is the most common we have in our country here. Because of the nature of our culture, we attach seriousness and value to staff when there is a face behind the request. If you do anything virtual, you get a virtual attention. But when you visit people in person and you deliver the questionnaire, you are most likely to get some attention, especially from our context here. It appears to be one of the best way of getting more responses when especially you are dealing with the indigenous people. Okay, we want to know who is behind. If you have questions, we can ask you directly. So usually in this approach, you visit the organization or the individual who are the targets, and then you present the questionnaire to. Sometimes, depending on how lengthy it is or how available the respondent is, you may wait to receive the completed questionnaire, or you may return a later date to pick up the questionnaire. The advantage here is that if they are able to read for themselves, they are able to answer the questionnaire more independently and at their own convenience. So even if they are busy at work, what it means that they can take it to the house, or at the end of the work, the day's work, they can respond to it, and then you can return to pick it up. There tend to be a high response rate with this approach, especially in our context. It has its disadvantages though. It means you must know the location or the physical location of all of them, and it requires you walking to them or moving to meet them physically. And that involves money, transport, and other expenses for the day for each data collection enumerator you engage to physically go to where the respondents are and deliver, and sometimes return on a later date to retrieve the questionnaire. It can be costly in terms of movement up and down, and despite its advantages, okay, of high response rate. All right. Now, another advantage of even that is if you obtain a questionnaire and there's an issue with that questionnaire, you know you can trace your steps back to the very location where you gave the questionnaire out to obtain any rectification that may be needed. Nowadays, online and email approaches have also been included. Instead of the usual postal, you can send questionnaires by email. Again, what it means is that you must have the email addresses of your intended respondents so that you can mail it to them. We have Google Forms, SurveyMonkey, Kubu Collect, and several others are online platforms that are used for designing and administering survey studies. So you can design your questionnaire on those platforms, and you can create a link that you can share with a large number of people far and near who can respond to those questions or your questionnaire. All these have the advantage. When it comes to the online ones, one key advantage is that you're able to reach out to a large pool of respondents. It doesn't mean you're going to have a high response rate, but what it means is that you are not restricted by geographical boundaries. It is even far easier to reach further people beyond your immediate surrounding compared to the postal approach. It is cheaper because the cost will not be as high as buying stamps and paying for postal services or traveling to deliver questionnaires and pick back or making a phone call to get a questionnaire responded. It is cheaper. You can reach people from further locations all around, reach a large pool of respondents, but it is noted to have a low response rate. There is no face behind the request, so people can look at it, attempt to answer it and abandon, and feel little or no guilt about it at all. Okay, so it is a challenge, but because you are able to circulate the link to a large number of people, it is also a viable option. Okay. Now, some of the disadvantage with these online approaches, and especially with the email, you may send the mails and they will be registered in spam, but not in the main inbox. And this happens a lot. And the respondent may not have cited it earlier to respond to it. So you may need to make a lot of follow-ups to get such mails responded to. All right. Now there is street interview or intercept, where you intercept people on their way to work. You meet people randomly on the streets, and then you engage them in a survey. You should know the kind of studies that these will work for. Not when you are doing a study that is a bit extensive. How many questions can you ask somebody who is busy walking on the street, either going to work or returning? How much of their time can you take? Okay, so you need to take things like that into consideration. So it is when that kind of study is designed in a very simple way that you can ask simple, straight questions that doesn't require much thinking and much time to respond to. And in that case, you are more likely to use even an interviewer-administered form of questionnaire where you ask the question and then they will respond and you take. So when they are everyday life questions that are easy to answer, not requiring much opinion polls, it is easy to do that using the street interview. If it is a detailed study, it becomes difficult. On the street, you can't get much time or attention to be given to your for the approaches. There are many, and you can combine them. You can combine at the point of analysis. You will want to prove to your readers that by using different approaches to collect the data, there was no form of bias injected in the data. The responses from each of the approaches you use in collecting the data to see if there are significant differences in the responses or not. Okay. You talk about some of the analysis you can do to check those stuff. All right. So finally, assuming you have chosen the right or the most suitable approach to administer your questionnaire or combination of approaches to administer your questionnaire, and we are assuming you have received the responded questionnaires or the completed questionnaires. Now you need to generate some descriptive summaries about your data, okay? The data you have received. We are assuming you have entered them into a software package or to generate some, you have a fair idea to evaluate if, for instance, the responses to a particular statement were to range from 1 to 7. You want to know if that range was adhered to. Probably a respondent may have entered a number beyond the range you specified, or probably at the point of entry, you might have mistakenly typed a number larger than you intended to. So we need to do a preliminary assessment of the data in general to understand the structure of the data and the attributes of the data, to be sure that everything is in order before you even begin any form of analysis to make any inference. So sometimes we use graphs like bar graphs and histograms to check the distribution of the data of your variables. There are assumptions that we make when we are making when we want to perform certain assumptions, statistical assumptions we make when we want to perform a statistical analysis. Okay, and those assumptions are usually around the distribution of the data or of the variables are necessary because statistical tools that have been developed to analyze quantitative data and to arrive at certain conclusions are contingent on certain assumptions made about the data we are going to analyze. A common assumption made is about the distribution of the data, and it's about normality assumption. There is a normal theory in statistics that states that, or that assumes that, when you are conducting most of these statistical analysis, most of them fall under the category of what we call, the techniques that people have developed to analyze data fall under what we call the parametric approach, okay? And when you are conducting any of these parametric analysis, like the usual correlation analysis, Pearson correlation, and also the usual regression analysis we do, linear regression, they are under the class of parametric estimators, and they make the assumption that your variables must not violate the normality assumption. And the normal assumption is that the distribution of your data should have that bell shape, that school bell shape, the normal school bell shape that looks like a heap of gari or a heap of sugar, that kind of figure. Probably if I'm confusing you, let me just try and demonstrate it here for you. Let me just, I hope you can still see my whole screen, right?
Yes.
You can see my screen. Please, I need some feedback here.
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm trying to project or just demonstrate. It just looks like the normal school bell, okay? The shape of the school bell. So the middle of this to the ground, okay, to the base, that is the middle or the central tendency of the distribution of this data. That is where you usually have what we call the mean, the average of the scores for a particular variable will lie in the very middle. Though my distribution here is not very perfect, if you have the average or the mean of the scores on a variable in the middle like this, it divides this distribution you see here into some form like a symmetry. The left and the right are symmetrical. What this means is that all the other data points are equally spread around the mean, on both on the left and on the right. When your data behaves according to this normal distribution, okay, that is the representation of the data follows this normal school bell shape. Then those correlation and regression analysis you are going to perform will generate a more reliable and robust estimate. The estimates you are going to get at the end of the day will be more reliable and unbiased. In other words, if your distribution do not follow this, using any of follow the normal distribution, if you apply any of analyze your data or techniques, so there are other parameters called the non-parametric techniques that allow data that follow or do not that violate the normal distribution assumption to be analyzed so that the parameters estimated and the conclusions that will be made will be more reliable, that is, will be less biased. So it becomes necessary for you to understand your data and the attributes about your data, such as their distribution. Okay. So normally you can actually conduct a normality test, or you can use histograms just to visualize the distribution of your data, each of the variables, so that you know they are not violating certain assumptions about the methods you want to use in analyzing your data. Okay, so let's go back to our discussion. Okay, so sometimes not quickly explore your data in your data. Movements of your data, and it can count the number of valid responses out of the total responses for each variable. So you can tell if there are missing points in your data set, so that you decide how you are going to fix it. It could be an oversight that when at the point of entry, you jumped something. It could also be that the questionnaire, that statement was not answered by a particular respondent. And in which case, you may be able to follow up the person to see if you can get the response. In some cases, you can't follow up the respondent. So how do you deal with this? There are techniques of dealing with missing data. Now, identify and deal with outliers. You are studying a population and you are not able to study the entire population. So you sample from the population, and your assumption is that the chosen sample is a good representation of the population. What you are saying is that the characteristics of the sample almost fully mimics or represents or matches that of the population you are trying to study. So, assuming we are studying your class and we are looking at the age of people in the class, it is normal to assume that for a master's class, the age range should at least begin from 19. You don't expect a minor to be in a master's class. And as for the top end or the ceiling of the age, I won't risk giving the ceiling for the age range, but at least if I come to a master's class, I expect that the least or the youngest person should be like 19 or something. Then, assuming I collect data on the age distribution of the class, and I find that there is an age of 2, an age of 5, someone with the age 12, then that becomes an outlier. It clearly shows that perhaps that respondent, if you cross-check and that is the true score for that variable for that case, then that case might not belong to the population of interest. It might just be an abnormality in that particular population. There are instances you find very smart and brilliant children skipping school, skipping the various classes, and so those become outliers. It happens in real life. You are trying to study firms in Ghana, and there can be an abnormally large firm being part of the sample. That becomes an outlier. And the reason we become concerned about identifying outliers and removing them from our data is that they can distort the distribution of our data. And in statistics, we make decisions and analysis around the averages or the means. And when you have some of these outliers, they distort the means and the movements of our variables. For instance, if you have a class where there are 10 people in it, and their age range is expected to be from age 10 to age 15. Their average age or the mean age to fall within 10 and 15. Now, assuming this class, when we went to take data on their age, we found out that there is old in that class. A single outlier who is 95 years old in that class. Things you can make about your study will not represent the population well. It will not represent the sample well, and hence the population well. So majority of them, out of the 10 people in the class, 9 of them are aged between 10 and 15. And 1 of them is 95 years old. Because of that single one person, when we are looking for the average age of that class, it will shoot beyond 20, which is not representative, very representative of the sample you are studying. So this is just a simple analogy I'm throwing to help us understand why we need to identify outliers and also deal with them. And of course, check if every other statistical assumption your data needs to meet for the statistical methods you intend to use to analyze your data are met. So one popular one you'll be looking at is normality assumption. At the data level, at the discrete data level, at looking at each of the data points, you want to be sure if the distribution of each of the data variables do not violate the normality, the normal theory assumption. If it violates, then you know that you may have to look for a non-parametric alternative of the approach or the statistical tool you intended using. Sometimes there are ways of transforming the variables, manipulating the variables such that you can use parametric analysis to achieve your goals. But it all lies with knowing the exact distribution of your variables, the data in your variables, and knowing what approach to use to correct the issue at hand, okay? And doing such exploration of your variables, the variables in your data set will help you develop a preliminary understanding of your data so that you can revise or determine the appropriate tools you are going to use in analyzing them going forth, or to also know how good your data is right from the onset and whether you have adequate sample for your study, or whether you need to go back to the field and even confirm certain responses you have in your data set, or even conduct additional studies to come and add. So there is that initial stage where you seek to understand the general behavior attributes of the data variables in the data set, and to have an initial qualitative judgment of how sound the data you have is before you even proceed to the key or the major analysis. Now, some of the tools we use at this exploratory stage include tabulation. That usually helps you organize or summarize data about count objects, where we use frequencies to count the number of times an object appeared or a response was used, okay? Usually when you are looking at one variable, then you say tabulation. And when you are combining responses across multiple variables, we usually use the cross tabulation form or in a cross-tab form, okay? So it's typically used in a two-way frequency table to enable comparison between groups. So there is a question you are asking, and you have a response format or sort of responses that each respondent will choose. Now you also want to look at not just how they responded to those questions, but you also want to compare those responses according to groups, like gender, male, female. You want to compare their responses on a particular categorical variable or nominal variable or ordinal variable, where you want to test for differences between either a frequency between frequency distribution for two or more categorical variables. That is a non-metric one. In a cross tabulation, chi-square will help you determine the degrees of the extent to which those responses from the groups deviate or align with each other, the extent to which they are different or not. So it looks at the differences, testing the significance of the differences in terms of the responses across the groups that you have in your cluster. And a higher form is ANOVA test that check the significance of difference between two metric scores, that is means. Okay, so when the metric you are looking at is not in the form of categorical variables, where respondents will choose different kind of responses like maybe SHS, SHS, and then postgraduate, help you check the different responses on a variable like that across different groups. ANOVA may be used to test the significant difference between the average age of maybe males and females, to compare and to tell the significant difference between the average age of either males and females. Now, correlation. Correlation is used to estimate the association or the relationship that exists between two variables. And it can be metric or non-metric. But for most of the things we'll be doing with, we'll be using the metric, which we use the Pearson correlation estimator. It looks at how two variables behave at a time. Should one gain an increase, what happens to the other? Does it also gain an increase? Then we say they increase or they change in the same direction. If one increases and the other variable decreases in measure, then we say they move in opposite direction. We say they are negatively correlated or associated. So it tries to look at the direction and magnitude of association between two variables at a time. Means and standard deviations. In your data sets, or what is the central point in that data? That is what means helps you to do. All right, Yao.
Henry, please, you
Hello.
keep dropping. Yeah, you keep dropping off. So it says we keep losing some of the things you are saying.
Sorry. Today we don't have strong internet, and pardon me for that. But let me repeat the last point. Means are used to gauge the central tendency in a data set. When you sorry, excuse me. Sorry. All right. So we are trying to switch to another internet source. Let me see. Have you tried it? But I hope you are using a different. Okay. All right. Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me? Yeah. It stays stable. Okay. All right. So means are used to determine the central tendency on of a data on any particular variable. So you pick like age. You have collected data on the age of all the respondents, maybe 50, 100. Now you ask yourself, what is the most representative age in this group of respondents I have taken the data from? Okay. We use means to determine that central tendency, where the average age is likely to be. Okay. So when it is a metric variable where we are using a scale measure, that is the highest form of scaling we discussed from last week, then mean will be suitable. But when we are dealing with categorical variables, nominal variables, where we are counting in terms of frequency, then things like modes will be a most representation of central tendency. The most occurring, the most frequent occurring response will be an appropriate gauge of central tendency. Now, standard deviation helps us to have an understanding of the extent of variability in the data and how the data is spread or distributed around the mean. So if you have a large standard deviation, it tells you that most of the data points are on that variable are scattered quite further away from the mean. And you have a very small standard deviation. It tells you that variability in the data set is very small, such that all the data points are clustered around the mean. You don't have to move further away from the mean to capture the entire data set. Okay. All right. So when we get to doing some of the demonstration, we will show you how these are done in practice. Okay. Now, having gone through the initial exploration of your data, the next step before you analyze your data is measurement validation. It's because we want to pass this step. That is why we spent a whole lot of time talking about how to correctly define your construct and its domain, and to come out with measures or items to correctly and accurately capture these concepts from the empirical world. Now, the moment of truth is subjecting your measurement instrument, which is your questionnaire you designed, to test. The questionnaire you designed was used to capture certain data, and that data becomes the input to subject to statistical analysis to test the reliability and the validity of your questionnaire instrument. So for reliability tests, it seeks to examine the internal consistency and unidimensionality of your measures. And some of the tools or techniques we use that have been developed for us to use as to gauge reliability test is the alpha reliability. Okay. And there's item total correlation, and then item interconstruct correlation. Beyond reliability tests, we have validity tests. And validity tests, we'll be looking at things like convergent validity test and discriminant validity test. Now, on the subject of reliability, what is it? It's a degree to which a measurement instrument literally think of something like a meter rule, a scale at the butchery, or a thermometer used in the hospital, produces stable and consistent results. So let's use a scenario in the hospital. Before you go to see the doctor in the consulting room, they take your vitals and all that, including temperature. Now, if that thermometer that was used to measure your body temperature will be deemed reliable, if it reads like 38 degrees Celsius and we repeat it again, we expect it to read 38 degrees Celsius again and again and again and again, as long as your body temperature has not changed within that moment or within that period. That is reliability. If the initial test says your body temperature is 38 degrees Celsius, if we conduct the temperature reading again, it should read 38 degrees Celsius. Again and again, it should read 38 degrees Celsius. Under the caveat that, or under the assumption that your body temperature itself has not changed within the time that these tests were conducted. So the reliability of an instrument is its ability to produce consistent and stable results when used a number of times. If you go to the butchery, abattoir, and they are selling to you a pound of beef, if we take that beef and we take it to another scale, or if we pick that beef and we put it back on the scale and it doesn't read 1 pound, then that scale is faulty. It's not reliable. So let's bring it to our study. Your questionnaire is an instrument. It is used to capture data. We want to convince ourselves that that instrument you use in capturing the data is reliable. But the only difference is that we are not able to go back to the field again and again and again to check reliability. That would have been the best and surest way to establish reliability of an instrument. However, what we do is, for every construct you wanted to measure, remember you used multiple indicators, multiple measures, multiple items to capture that abstract notion. We indicated earlier in our discussion that it might not be prudent in most cases to use just one or few indicators to capture an abstract notion. You must use as many as you can and as reasonable as it will be for your study. Not too much or not too many to make your study bulky, your questionnaire bulky and boring to respond to. Now, the idea we'll be establishing here is that each of those indicators are trying to capture the parent constructs. So how consistently is each of those measures for the constructs you are trying to measure consistently measuring it? So let me put this literally. Assuming that the score on process innovation, or let me say, okay, let me use the example, the casual example we used, the score on beauty. The average, our judgment of the average score on the beauty of a particular respondent is 5. Then we assume that for each of the beauty points, the beauty indicators such as skin complexion, roundness of facial construction, and then body contour or the structure. Across each of these three indicators, this respondent who got an overall score of, in our mind, 5 on the scale of beauty should be scoring around the same point across each of these three indicators. Each of these three indicators should be consistently giving this respondent a score around 5. If each of these measures of beauty produces a score that is consistent, then we will say we have achieved reliability or good reliability. So a specific measure statisticians use is what we call the Cronbach's alpha. It is a measure of reliability of a scale. Okay, it tries to measure the internal consistency, and that is, consistency here is used to imply how closely related a set of items are as a group. How do we determine a good alpha score? An alpha value of 0.7 or greater is often preferred. The score is computed from 0 to 1. The more the score is closer to 1, the better the reliability. The more closely related the set of measurement items are, and the more consistent or reliable that scale of measurement is. Therefore, a measure is said to have a high reliability if it produces similar results under consistent conditions. So that is for reliability. What about validity? Let me pause and then throw in this scenario about the dart game. The dart game. Let me see if I can pull something from the internet for you on the dart game. We'll pick images. Okay, so let's pick this. Oh, I was expecting the image to be bigger here. Yeah, this is a dart game. And everybody wants to hit the bull's eye. That is the valid point that when you hit, you get the highest point, or that is the target we want to hit. So in our questionnaire, this spot is what we really want to capture from our questionnaire for a particular construct. So we define it and we come out with a number of measures. So consider the dart that you are going to throw as the multiple number of measures. Now, consistency is achieved if you throw the dart and hit the same spot all the time. When we look at this particular score we have here, the darts are hitting different places. Only one of the darts hits the bull's eye. The rest are hitting outside the bull's eye. So there is no consistency. You can consistently hit outside the bull's eye. For instance, where my cursor is pointing, that is the dart on the top here. You can consistently be hitting that point when you throw all your darts. When you do that, there is high consistency. There is high reliability. Because all the time when you throw your dart, you hit the same or the exact or the exact location. But hitting the same point on the board here doesn't mean you are hitting the right target. You can constantly miss the right target. In that sense, we can say you have reliability. But since you are missing the right target, you are not measuring the exact thing we want to measure, even though you have consistently measured the wrong thing, you have not achieved validity. A valid point will be when you throw the dart to the bull's eye. So consistency does not connote validity. So the two are measured or are assessed differently. Consistency just shows that the responses are closer to each other. We are reliably capturing one phenomenon. But the point is what we are capturing the exact thing we want to capture or not? We are constantly throwing the dart at this particular point. But is that the point we want to hit? So think about somebody who have bad eyesight, but they are very good at consistently throwing the dart. They may be hitting a location which is not the bull's eye, which is the target. So there's another measure or evaluation of the measurement instrument, which is validity, where we want to convince ourselves that not only is the measurement reliable or consistent in measuring something, but that thing it is measuring is the actual thing we are interested in, but nothing else. You may have more than 2 constructs in your variable in your study. You may be consistently, your measurements may be consistent in measuring a particular variable like internet usage. But can we convince ourselves that it is not mistakenly measuring attitude towards internet security? It is measuring only internet usage. The set of measures for internet usage is only measuring internet usage and nothing else. That becomes validity. So we can picture the board, the dart game here. The more you hit the bull's eye, then the more valid your measures are. If you hit either in the bull's eye or outside the bull's eye, but you consistently throw a number of darts at that same point, it is reliability. So we want our instrument to be both reliable and valid. To be both reliable and valid means you will throw the dart at the main target, which is the bull's eye, not once, not twice, thrice or more, because anytime you throw the dart, you will hit on the bull's eye. That is how precise we want our measurement instrument to be. So at this point, let me project a sample questionnaire for you to see. So these set of 4 measures here are measuring a particular construct. And how are they scored? By checking or crossing any of these values in the response side. So if each of these is trying to capture a particular notion which has been stated up, then if a particular respondent is scoring the first item 4, in order to achieve consistency and reliability, then the responses of the remaining ones should be around 4, a little on the left of 4, or a little on the right of 4, or 4, 4, 4 throughout. Then we say that these measures are reliable, are internally consistent, because when we look at how the respondents are scoring them, for a respondent who think the first item, the organization may score around 4, If these measures are reliable, then their responses for the remaining 3 should be closer to 4. It shouldn't necessarily be exactly 4, 4, 4 throughout, but it should be around 4. 3, 4, 5, and not much. If you see a jump from 4 to 7, it is a cause for alarm. Either the respondent is taken haphazardly anyhow, or they are not reading, or you, the researcher, did not design your measures well. Because if they are all measuring the same thing, then the scores on them should be closer. We are not saying they should be exactly the same, but closer. That is how literally I can paint the picture of reliability to you. Now, if this construct, these set of measures are measuring a construct different from the next set of measures, then of course, the average scores here should differ from the average scores on the next construct because they are different things. If these two are different, then how I evaluate the first set of measures should differ from how I evaluate the next set of measures. So in the statistical softwares, these are some of the ways it will try to establish reliability and validity. If we can establish that these set of measures are internally consistent and these other set of measures are also internally consistent, but how we scored these set of measures is different from how we scored these set of measures, then it tells us that our instrument is both reliable and valid in that it shows discrimination in terms of what these set of measures are capturing and what these other set of measures are capturing. So this is just by the way. Let's go back to our discussion. So in terms of validity, we can have what we call content or phase validity, which we talked briefly earlier. What we are saying that the set of measures in terms of their wording should seem to capture the domain of the construct. That is the definition, the boundaries we gave in defining the construct. So that is done qualitatively, and you should have ensured that before even going to the field to collect data. Okay. So it is just determined by examining the measures in light of the definition of the construct. That is done, that is a qualitative judgment, and you should have done that before you even go to the field to collect data. It is the reason we spend time looking at how to looking at carefully defining your construct and coming out with measures that reflect the exact definition you used. Okay, but having collected the data, we need to demonstrate statistically that the measuring one construct is not measuring another construct. And let's try to use this example from this stage onwards. This is a research question that the researcher seeks to answer the question, how does green leadership orientation drives green or contribute to green performance? So here we have two concepts. It means we have two definitions to make: green leadership orientation, green performance. And for green leadership orientation, we are supposed to develop measures or items or indicators that we can use to empirically capture green leadership orientation, and do the same for green performance. We administer our questionnaire, we obtain our data, which are the responses on these two constructs. So this is our definition for green leadership orientation. It refers to the degree to which leaders recognize the significant impacts humans and firms have on the natural environment and the need to minimize such impact. Now let's look at how, in this example, the measures or the empirical indicators were constructed. Number one, when humans interfere with nature, it often produces disastrous consequences. Can you confirm that this is reflected in the definition? Let's look at the next statement. Humans are severely abusing the environment. Again, let's look at the third. We are approaching the limits of the number of people on Earth. Plants and animals have as much right as humans to exist. Despite our special abilities, humans are still subject to the laws of nature. Let's go back to read the definition. Green leadership orientation refers to the degree to which leaders recognize the significant impact humans and firms have on the natural environment and the need to minimize such impact. So my question is, can you relate these measures to this definition? The extent or the degree to which leaders recognize the impact of both humans and firms on the natural environment and the need to minimize this. If you read these statements, are you able to relate to the idea or the definition painted here? I need some feedback here. Can you pick any of these and explain how it reflects in the definition? What we are doing is judgment of content or face validity to see if these measures were correctly developed to capture this notion from the real world. Anybody to try? Hello? Anybody to try? Assuming you are to evaluate these measures, the construct has been defined, and you have a set of measures presented like this. I hope I'm not in the class alone. Hello, are you guys there?
Oh, we are here. Yeah.
I'm talking alone, so. Okay. Okay, so let me try one. Then maybe one of you can also demonstrate one for us. So we are trying to evaluate how the extent to which or the degree to which, as a leader in an organization, you recognize the fact that activities of human beings and firms have an impact on the natural environment, and we should minimize it. To put this simply, what we are trying to say is that to what degree does a leader in an organization agree that we should be mindful of how we influence other lives around us or the environment around us? So if a leader, if I read the first statement, when humans interfere with nature, it often produces disastrous consequences. Then my reaction to this question or this statement will determine if I do agree or if I do recognize that human activities can harm the natural environment. So if I consent to this statement, it goes to confirm that I have a green leadership orientation. The second statement, humans are severely abusing the environment. It means our activities are harming the environment. If I agree to this, if I consent to this statement, then it shows that I am aware and I'm accepting that human activities is ruining the environment. The third statement is that we are approaching the limit of the number of people on Earth. If I agree that when human beings interfere with nature and they produce disastrous consequences, and human activities are severe, or humans are severely abusing the environment, then when we have more people approaching the limits on the Earth, then I kind of literally agree that human activities are disastrous to the natural environment. And the fourth statement says plants and animals have as high rights or as much rights as humans to exist. If I agree to this statement, or if I consent to this statement, then it goes a long way to indicate how green I am oriented, because I tend to put much or equal value on the lives of plants and animals and other things around us as humans. The last statement looks at, is that despite our special abilities, humans are still subject to the law of nature. Me being a human being doesn't make me special or doesn't grant me the special rights to abuse other nature. If I consent to this notion, then it kind of gives a signal the degree to which I am green oriented in my leadership position. So if you look at this definition, you should be able to deduce its meaning from each of these statements. Any comments so far? So what we do when you evaluate your data collection instrument is by looking at the face meaning of these statements and try to see if they truly reflect in the definition here. The key words here is recognition of impact and the need to minimize it. If you look at the first one, it's a recognition of impact. Second statement is a recognition of impact. Third statement is recognition of impact. Fourth statement is recognition of the need to minimize impact. And the fifth statement also emphasizes on the need to minimize impact. This we have just gone through is what we call the content or face validity. We are trying to establish that these measures carefully reflect the definition of our constructs. How about green performance? Per our definition, we say it refers to an output that demonstrates the degree at which firms are focused on protecting the earth. So now let's see the measures here. Our firm implemented practices to reduce waste and emissions from its transport operations. Our firm has taken initiatives to reduce environmental impact of transport noise in its service. Our firm established partnership with others in order to reduce environmental impact. Our firm reduced the risk of environmental accidents, environmental accidents and spills and releases. When you look at these indicators or measures, they even do more than capturing the definition, but also help us to understand the context in which this study was conducted. I want someone to tell us the context of this study. Yes, this study is measuring, these measures are measuring green performance, but in what context? Can somebody pick it out? Quickly. Well, I'll assume you guys are driving by whilst we are having this class. Can someone pick the context, the industrial context for this particular study? Just from reading these measures. Hello. Hello, Joshua.
Yeah, so I think this shows their need or their approach to sustainability, environmental sustainability.
Yes, that is true. But carefully read through the measures we have on the screen. Okay. Can you tell the industry that the study is being conducted in?
Most likely the waste disposal or
Okay.
what do you call it? Oil, it could be for the oil industry as well.
All right. Okay. So, but clearly, if you look at statement 1 from transport operations.
Transport industry.
Yes.
Transport. So, yes, it could be waste management because they deal with a lot of vehicles. Transport is a major operations. Transportation is a major operations for them. It could be distribution firms where transportation is a major operations for them. And then it could also be delivery firms or third-party logistics firms for whom transportation is a major aspect of their operations. Okay, so that is the beauty with the measures. They should begin to capture the domain of the concept that you are trying to capture from the real world in its context, industrial context or empirical context. And that's exactly what these measures are doing. So we want that an output, that is performance, an operations output or an operational activity should demonstrate the firm's focus on protecting the earth. So you ask yourself, how can we as a firm in the conduct of our business operations protect the earth? How are we going to do that? Okay, so let's look at some of our operations and see. Then they say our firm implements practices to reduce waste and emissions from our transport operations. Transport vehicles burn fossil fuel and they release gases that can be harmful to humans and to the environment and to the environment. So if we take practices or if we engage in practices that reduce these waste emissions, then of course we are protecting the earth. So it shows that we are achieving green performance as a firm. Our firm takes initiative to reduce environmental impact of transport noise in its service. Transport produces noise. So in most advanced cities where they are very mindful of this, they earmark a good space for construction of roads such that residential facilities are not closer to the road. Where they are closer, they try to reduce noise pollution by erecting walls that will absorb the noise from the vehicles so that households can enjoy their peace of mind. So in transport operations, one of the negative externalities is noise pollution. So if the firm is doing its best to reduce the production of noise from operating their transport vehicles, then of course they are trying to reduce or protect the earth. Hence, they are green consent and they have achieved some green performance through their output. Third, our firm established partnership with others in order to reduce environmental impact. Sometimes your organization doesn't have any specialty in pursuing sustainability, environmental sustainability. So you end up teaming up with other parties who can help you revamp your operations to minimize environmental impact. For an organization to go to this extent to invest in relationships and partnerships to reduce their environmental impact, it means they have achieved some level of green performance because they are seeking to protect the earth. And lastly, our firm reduced the risk of environmental accidents, spillage, and releases. Think about, you correctly mentioned when you said perhaps in the oil and gas industry, and you can even think about the distribution of beverages like Coca-Cola, Guinness, Ghana, and those guys. Whenever their vehicles involved in an accident, the earth and the environment suffers the most. Broken glasses and soda, I mean the content of what the bottles were carrying are all discharged onto the earth. If it is fuel, it is discharged onto the vast lands that is absorbed into the earth. And when it is ignited, we all know the disaster that can occur. So in transport operations, as part of protecting the earth is to minimize these accidents that leads to spillage that harm the environment. So to do this, they are protecting the earth, and hence it adds in their credits in achieving green performance. I want to believe these two examples have given us an idea how to define and make sure that the measures we are using clearly depict the definitions we have made. And this is what we call content or phase validity. When you evaluate your measures vis-a-vis your definitions to ensure that they are captured, the measures capture the entire domain of the definitions, then we said you have achieved construct validity, content validity. But however, when you have collected your data, we still need to establish other forms of validity, construct validity. Now, in the questionnaire, you have plenty measures measuring different or several constructs. So like in the example we have two sets of measures measuring different constructs. There are several ways to achieve construct validity. It is difficult to really achieve construct validity in the sense that you may use several measures or different sets of measures or methods, if possible, to measure a construct. If there are possible ways to measure any construct to achieve construct validity, you may adapt the two different approaches in measuring the same construct. So that if at the end of the day, the two different approaches in measuring the construct are similar, then we say there is convergent validity. in our little discussions, the only way we are able to achieve this, the only way we are able to achieve this is to use multiple indicators. Okay. Please kindly give me a minute. I need to switch internet. Sorry. Okay, so we are back. All right, so we try to achieve this in our own way by using multiple indicators, as you saw in the examples we showed. Sometimes you can use, for instance, let me go back and show you another approach you can measure environmental performance. Where is it? The example. Green performance. You could also look out for any certification they have obtained or any award they have obtained for green performance. If something like that exists, that could also be an alternative way of measuring their green performance. Okay, so you could choose to use these psychometric measures to measure green performance, and then you also look out for certain awards or certain certification they have obtained as an indication of their green performance. In that case, you have used two different sets of approaches to measure green performance. And if their scores are very high on these indicators and they have such certification or award concerning green performance, then you can say that there has been convergence. The different approaches have converged in confirming that a firm is either has either high green performance or has low green performance. So this is sometimes difficult to achieve in real life because you may not have multiple ways of measuring the same thing, but it is acceptable that sometimes we just have multiple indicators here to measure different aspects of the construct we are looking at to achieve at convergent validity. So convergent validity is possible, but can be quite difficult to achieve. So we want to use the measures we are using. If they correlate very well, but fail to correlate with other measures of other variable, other constructs, then we assume convergent validity is achieved. This is what I mean. If these measures have high internal consistency, but do not correlate with these other measures, then we assume convergent validity has been achieved. Now, if the measures measure different things, then they should not be too highly correlated. So if the measures for green performance is truly different from the measures for green leadership orientation, then these two should not be highly correlated. When we compare green performance and green leadership orientation, these two constructs should not be highly correlated. There is a way we check this statistically through both correlation analysis and then from what we call discriminant validity test. When the correlation between two constructs should not be high compared to their internally shared variance. When that is established statistically, we assume that is what we call discriminant validity. It will make much sense when we begin to look at the sample data. So let's look at what we have here. Competitive intensity and technological turbulence are two different constructs we are trying to capture with empirical data. And each of these have their measures from 1 to 7 for competitive intensity, and then 1 to 4 for technological turbulence. What we are assuming here is that competitive intensity give rise to these indicators here that we observe on the real field. If there is high competitive intensity, you will see these. If there is low competitive intensity, you will see low scores on these indicators. The same applies to technological turbulence. So since these indicators are being used to capture the notion of competitive intensity, they should load very significantly on the scale of 0 to 1, approaching 1 on these paths. The same thing happens here. The relationship between these indicators and these parent construct, called the latent construct, they should have a strong correlation. Each of them should have a strong correlation with the parent construct. On a scale of 0 to 1, each of them should be having a loading approaching to 1. Now, when this happens, we say we have achieved convergence because these converge to measure that, and also these 7 converges to measure this. Now, since these measures are measuring different constructs, this measure and this construct should not be related or highly correlated with the measures of competitive intensity. So that even if we map the loadings from, or the association between the measures of competitive intensity, which are these 1 up to 7, on technological turbulence, then the loadings, the associations, the relationship should be approaching 0. Of course, if they are not related at all, we will not even be studying them in the first place. They are related. But the loadings here between one construct and the measures of another construct should be approaching 0. On the scale of 0 to 1, it should be approaching 0. Whereas the relationship between a construct and its own assigned indicators should be approaching 1. When you perform validity assessment, this is exactly what you are trying to achieve. So that when there is a strong correlation between the indicators and their parent constructs, we say there is convergence. And when convergent validity, and when the loadings or the relationship between one construct and the indicators of other constructs, or the relationship between one construct and the other construct is approaching 0, then we say there is discriminant validity. There are more types of validity than we have just talked about. You talked about phase or content validity, which is a qualitative something. We just talked about this convergent validity, which we said is a bit technical, and there are several ways to achieve them, because you would use different approaches to measure the same construct, and if those different approaches result in the same measure, then we say there is convergent validity. But because that may be difficult to conduct in every research, we rely on the multiple indicator approach, where we statistically establish that the measures of each construct are strongly correlated to their parent construct by approaching loadings of 1 on each, whereas their relationship with other measures or measures of other constructs should be approaching 0 to be a sign of discriminant validity. There are some more types of validity, such as predictive or criterion-related validity. This is sometimes also known as the nomological validity. What we mean here is that, let me go back to the diagram. Assuming we are conducting a study including these two constructs, they are related to each other, even though they are different, they are related to each other. We only expect that the measures of competitive intensity should not strongly correlate with the measures of technological turbulence. But the relationship between competitive intensity and technological turbulence exists. If they were not related at all, we wouldn't be studying them. Now, if they are related, we are trying to establish a predictive relationship between the two, which we will want to use regression to establish. So initially, our correlational analysis should be able to tell us that these two constructs are related. Not just related, but it should be able to tell us how they are related, positively or negatively. So another type of validity we do is that if we have truly captured the notions we are studying, then in our theorization, we had already stated a hypothesis that seeks to link those concepts. Beyond we establishing reliability and some initial validity, we are saying that our data should continue to establish that these concepts are related the way our theoretical argument suggested. It is only when we are able to establish this kind of validity that we know we can establish a solid relationship through our regression analysis. So, for example, does a measure of intention to purchase online predict online purchasing? If you intend to purchase online, then it follows logically that you are most likely to engage in online purchasing. Then there should be that positive correlation between intention to purchase online and online purchasing. So when we conduct a correlation analysis between these two variables, we expect a reasonable correlation between these two constructs and that the relationship should be positive. If that relationship fails to be positive, then it raises questions. Or if that relationship fails to be relevant, then it begins to raise questions that either the constructs were not correctly captured, or they simply are not related. And the connotation is that you may not be able to establish a prediction in your study. You may not be able to establish any relevant regression output. That is why this kind of validity we call predictive or criterion-related validity. Another name for it is nomological validity. From more or less coined from the word normal, what we expect or how we expect our variables to behave, you want to use correlation to check, to assess their relationships, to see if our expectation is being manifested to some extent. All right. So this whole measurement validation approach through reliability test and validity test is what we call measurement purification. In doing that, if you conduct reliability tests, you want to check internal consistency. If it is not satisfied, then you need to take initiatives to diagnose why reliability was not satisfied and what can be done about it. Purification means identifying a culprit measure that is behaving inconsistent and dealing with it. Sometimes it might just be a mere typo in your data set that may be causing the reliability issue. So you find it out and you fix it. And by doing so, you want to arrive at a set of measures that are both reliable and valid. So the initiatives you will do and the decisions you will take to remove and to retain certain measures is what we call the purification, item purification. Okay, so here we want to use the alpha reliability test and factor analysis for demonstration. So Cronbach alpha right away will be our measure for reliability or scale reliability. That is a measure of internal consistency, as we've talked about already. And our criteria for evaluating it is that the alpha score should be at least 0.0 and above. Factor analysis is what we will use to try to establish validity. So a little about it is that it's an interdependence technique whose primary purpose is to define the underlying structure among a set of items or measures or variables in the data set. It observes the variables and include a test score on the items. And the process identifies and defines sets of observed variables that are highly interrelated, then populate them under a latent factor. And those factors are assumed to represent dimensions. Let me take you back to, so this is what the software will try to do. It doesn't know you are calling this group of items indicators for competitive intensity. Neither does it know that this group of items here are used to measure technological turbulence. What factor analysis does is that it conducts some sort of correlation among all these 11 indicators. Try to identify those that are closely related to each other and classify them under a common factor, which it will just label with 1, 2, 3 onwards. Then it will look at the next set of indicators that are closely correlated to each other and classify them under another latent factor without putting your labels here. So when you evaluate the groupings of these indicators by the software, you will know as a researcher whether these set of measures pertains to competitive intensity or they pertain to technological turbulence. So that is how we will try to use the software to achieve that. And there are types of factor analysis: the exploratory factor analysis and confirmatory factor analysis. While the first type explores the structure or dimensions within the data on the basis of correlations, between the variables. CFA, the second option, imposes a dimensionality hypothesis against which dimensions are tested using covariance and error terms. Another difference, so the clear difference here is that exploratory factor analysis, coming from the word exploratory, it just explores the variables through correlational analysis and they group them into factors based on the extent to which certain set of variables or measures are closely correlated to each other, without an initial hypothesis to that structure. You just load the items and give to the software, and the software will do the groupings for you. In the second phase, you tell the software the groupings you have predetermined, and the software will try to use that structure, that hypothesis structure measurement model, and superimpose that structure on the covariance metrics structure of the data you have supplied it to determine the degree of fit between your measurement structure, your proposed measurement structure, and the actual structure that is occurring within the data. So in exploratory factor analysis, you will not see these the left-hand side, the right-hand side. You will not see these latent constructs and the arrows. You only load the measures like this raw and put into the software. And the software will try to group them according to how these set of measures are related among themselves. Now, when it comes to EFA, you will need to draw this structure where you have the latent constructs and map it to its corresponding indicators as you see in this structure. And then you subject this structure to the software, and the software will try to superimpose this structure you have designed on the covariance metric structure of the data you have supplied it with to determine the degree to which this structure closely fits with the covariance structure of the data. It is a bit of a complex issue, but when we do it in the practical session, I believe we will comprehend it better. It is important for us to talk about these the way we have, because when we begin to look at them, it will make much sense to us. So since our time is already done, I wouldn't bore you with the next few slides, because if we begin, we won't be able to establish a solid point before our time will be over. So it is just a few slides before we get to the laboratory practice. So I want to pause here. I want to pause on this slide so that tomorrow we'll continue with those few slides. And then we begin with the practical illustration of how to establish factor analysis and then also reliability analysis using SPSS. What I'm going to do is that I will share some two data sets with you. Through the class rep. You can download them. Whilst we are demonstrating in class, you may decide to also follow up with us, or whenever you are able to get the video, the recording back, you will have the data to try to practice with, so that you can have a practical feel of what we'll be doing in class, God willing, tomorrow. So with your permission, I want to bring our discussion this day to an end. If you have questions, I'm available to take them. If not, we will say au revoir to each other and then prepare to meet in the morning tomorrow. I know it's a lot of things we are putting out here, so but we shall go through. When we do the practical session, you will begin to appreciate, especially those of you who have not had a first-hand encounter with these stuff. Okay, Francis.
Yeah, Henry, thank you so much. My question has to do with there is an assignment in the course outline you give us, a research assignment.
Mm-hmm.
Are we to do it and produce it within 6 weeks? Because I see we would have to go and get data from one of these top supermarkets or something, so we can use in the analysis.
Yes, please.
Hey,
so
6.
Yeah. Okay, continue.
Then I don't know, getting the data within that time to do this work, I don't think it's really realistic. If we could be provided with the data, then we can do the work within the 6 weeks.
Okay. So this is how the course has been organized ever since. And trust me, it will help you a lot. It is just to give you that kind of avenue to put what we are discussing in class to test. Now, the fact that others have done it means that you can do it. We understand the challenge, so we are pretty much aware that you cannot do something like a top-notch study. So it is just to swiftly put to test the knowledge we are sharing here. So people leverage on relationships and friends to identify an easy place they can get easy audience to collect data. Okay, so look at the report we are expecting you to produce. It's not up to the standard length of a research article. Okay, so the idea is that we want to encourage you, knowing that you will actually conduct a research at the end of the program, to attempt doing putting the principles you have learned into practice. So seriously, nobody is expecting you to go and get super data for this, but apply the principles you have learned on a small scale, okay, and quickly put something together. That is why it's a teamwork.
Can we foreign the data? Because the question says Ghanaian data. If we can use foreign data, that one will be easy. We can download some.
So we want to ensure that you have an initial experience of what it means to go to the Ghanaian empirical setting to take data. It will give you some. That's what I'm saying. If you sit down as a group, trust me, you will find a way around this. I don't want to, on record, give you shortcuts, okay? But when you sit together as a group, this is a challenge. You have timelines. You have 6 weeks to accomplish this. How should we go about it? It's all part of the teamwork, because it will surprise
all right,
you.
Henry, you know it's fine. So you
get it. All right.
Off the record, we'll contact you. Then you give us.
Sure. You can do that. You're welcome. Yeah. So any other? If not, it's 5:30 on the dot, and I know you must be tired and exhausted by now. So let me ask, class rep, can we use this exact same link, God willing, tomorrow? Hello.
Yeah, he's not around, but yes, we can use the link.
Okay. All right. So have a wonderful day, and thank you for your contributions and questions and making today's discussion successful. So God willing, tomorrow, let's brace ourselves for some few practicals. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.